Welcome to episode 4 of the Star Wars X-Wing Book Club. I'm John Berry, and today we're going to be covering chapters 5 and 6 of Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron by Michael A. Stackpole. So as you can obviously tell, this is the 4th episode, so if you have not yet seen the first 3, I encourage you to do so before you continue any further, if you want to start at the beginning so you kind of know what's going on. If not, welcome if this is your first time, or welcome back if you have been tuning in repeatedly. Also, we're going to be taking a break next week. I'll be out of town through the 8th through the 17th of July, so I decided there will be no episodes of the book club on the 12th, though I will have an episode on the 19th. I consider doing one on the 12th and not on the 19th, knowing I will only really be able to get one of them made before I head off to my trip. But I figured, you know what, let me just do the 19th and skip the 12th. I figured it's going to be easier. And also some other video on for the 12th. I'm not sure what that video will be, but there will be a video at least on that day. It just won't be an episode of the book club. But anyhow, let's actually get into the book itself. But before I do that, I do want to encourage you to go consider checking out my website, joining my Discord server, or following me on social media. The links for all that stuff is in the description. So, let's actually get into the book, shall we? Since I've delayed for about 2 minutes now. Give or take, depending on editing, could be a bit less for you. But anyhow, so chapters 5 and 6 are from Corran Horn's perspective once again. Let's see, what I'm looking for is in these 2 chapters, basically it's confirmed that he will be in the rebuilt Rogue Squadron, and we also learn who else was in there, and we learn more about Corran Horn's backstory. So, chapter 5 is kind of, there's not too much out there, but they established that Corran Horn had the top score in the Redemption Flight Simulator exercise, and that the next person who came in second was not who Corran Horn was thinking, the Bror Jace. I think I said his first name correct, I can never say it correctly. That's what Corran Horn has thought, and that's what the previous chapters have built up on who would be the second best in the squadron. But actually the person who got second in that scenario was Gavin Darklighter, the cousin of Biggs Darklighter. Jace actually got third, and they kind of did a bit of banter between the parts of who got where in the scenario, and that, like, this person was at the top, this person was in the middle, that kind of stuff. Just some light banter, kind of understanding who was there. And it's also established in this chapter that Corran Horn, while he was pretty sure he was going to make it, and he did not want to make any assumptions. Which is actually, shows that he doesn't have some arrogance, and he cites, he does cite that at one point in the chapter that, one of the 2 chapters, that arrogance can be the downfall of a pilot. And then there's also establishes a little bit about his family, his father and his grandfather, how they've been involved in course, Corellian security, and so was Corran Horn, and that, his father had beaten all of his grandfather's records, and he had beaten his father's records in the training, so it kind of established, like, the Horns apparently have a legacy of breaking records. But also he wonders what his father would think of him. And I'm just going to quote, is that, so this is Corran Horn thinking, "And now I'm a rebel, an outlaw. What would my father and grandfather have thought?" A cold sensation raised goosebumps on his skin. "Whatever they would have thought, much worse if I'd become an imp," unquote. So it's basically what Corran Horn is saying. He wonders what his father and his grandfather would think of him joining the rebels, essentially becoming an outlaw, but pretty much figures that they'd rather him be a rebel, be an outlaw, rather than be an imperial, which is quite intriguing. And we learn more about Corran Horn's ancestry later on, his father and his grandfather. We learn more about them in later books, but when you think back to what this says, you will understand it. In fact, we get a little bit of a hint about what we get later on in, I think it's chapter 6, I'm not sure, but one of these two chapters where Colton tells his other members of Rogue Squadron, his comrades in arms, if you will, that his grandfather, I think it was, he said, yeah, his grandfather, did not approve of the way the Imperials treated the Jedi and had a Jedi friend. So that kind of establishes why they would rather him be a rebel than an Imperial, at least in Cornholm's thinking. And of course, what we learn later on will shed new light onto this, but we're not there yet. But we will be returning to this concept more or less later on. Let's see. And then of course there's the briefing with with Commander and Tilly's Wedge and all that, but a neat little thing is talking about how Rogue Squadron's role will be, is talked about in both chapters, and how they're essentially a commando pilot wing, so they're pilot commanders, if you will. And kind of talked how they mentioned Cloud City and Lando Calrissian, and how he had commando pilots, but they weren't enough to stop Vader. And then also Cohen then brings up how Corsac had a tactical response team in very much a similar vein. So it kind of goes over that. We learn more about Tycho Chellchu, but not too much. Most of that had been established. But a big thing we learn is how the legacy of Rogue Squadron now, Wedge tells all the new recruits that none of them are going to live up to the legends. And even though they might be some better pilots as those who had died. Which is quite interesting, though Cohen Ho thinks to himself, I can try at least, or I can dream at least. And also kind of thinks to himself that you ought to surpass that thing, but he didn't say it out loud. There's other things in there, and then they talk about how two of the paths had death marks on them, and how that they're all eventually going to get to two of the new paths, I should say. And once the Empire learns that they're with Rogue Squadron. And then of course that leads to some speculation on who has it. The guest, one of them, a Shavistian, I think his name, is basically kind of a wolfman, and how they don't get along with the Empire, and the military protocol droid that's assigned to Rogue Squadron explains more of the details. And then it's revealed that the other person who has it is Cohen Horn. And then that's how chapter 5 ends. And this is what I get. So the droids just say, you did so, and go through why Cohen has a death mark on his head. And death mark is basically how I think wanted dead alive, but preferably dead. That kind of idea. And then chapter 6 opens up with the word laughing. So what? And it's continuing directly from what happened in chapter 5. And so Cohen's laughing about all this. And then so the other people with him are like taken aback because the military protocol droid MG says that he has a death mark for basically the brutal murder of 6 smugglers, and then he's laughing about it, says it's nothing and forgotten all about it. Yeah, that would kind of take anyone aback by a little bit. But then he goes on, Cohen Horn, to explain what it was, and that it was all faked by him and his superior in Corsac, Gil Bastra, to help with, when Gil, Cohen Horn, so that, they had the public falling out about it, and, that he allegedly, nothing was said from him until he actually did, leave, and so the Imperial Intelligence was attached to Corsac to put a death mark on Cohen Horn for the murder of those 6 smugglers who never even existed. And then Cohen explains this to everyone there. And it's just quite, it's kind of pretty good, slicing when you think about that. Slicing and hacking, as we would say in the real world, rather than slicing. But it goes through all that, and yeah, just kind of explains more about Cohen's backstory and how he actually did, slip away from the Empire's eyes, if you will, and then, of course, we find out in this chapter that Gil Bastra has died, but we don't know for sure because it's just mentioned it was a HoloNet report, and it's validated. How valid it is unsure of. Because if you remember from an earlier chapter, we do learn that Crichton was torturing Gil Bastra for information, but so the question is, did he die or not? Who knows? We don't quite know yet. Okay, Gil Bastra probably is dead, and if I remember correctly, I believe he is. But let's not jump to any conclusions, shall we? And then, of course, they talk more about Rogue Squadron after that being a symbol, how they're all searching for justice, but really more about, some form of justice. But the big thing I'm taking away is Rogue Squadron as a symbol and how they're going to do something symbolic. They've been symbolically assembled to represent a lot of different members of the New Republic, and to, appeal to, to planets that are not yet sure who to side with and that stuff. Which is actually quite interesting, to say the least, and all that. And then they talk about how it's a good chance that Rogue Squadron will not only be doing not as symbolic actions, but they will be the symbolic head, if not the actual head, of the invasion of Coruscant. And if you know anything about the book, I'm going to spoil it. They will be at the head of the Coruscant invasion. I will spoil that for you if you haven't read this series before. But the idea that Rogue Squadron is going to be the first wave on Coruscant. First wave, that reminds me of something. I'm actually right now listening to an audiobook called The First Wave, which is about the D-Day landings and the first wave onto the beaches. So essentially, Rogue Squadron will be the very first wave of New Republic troops onto Coruscant after intelligence, because let's be real, there's probably already intelligence operatives there. But it's going to be, they're going to be like the very first paratroopers who dropped in on D-Day. They're not going to be paratroopers, but they're going to be the first ones to head in. That's what's being told to us, and how they're going to be the tip of the spear. Those are going to be the very first ones to go. And that kind of reminded me of the audiobook I've been listening to as well. So I just thought I'd bring that up. Okay, and I think I don't have too much more to say, but they also talk a little bit about token. Let's see, there's a Twi'lek lawyer who's in the squadron. What's his name? Let me just double check, because I don't want to get it wrong. Nawa Ven, I think I got that right. Basically, he says I'm either a token Twi'lek or a token loyal. And then another one laughed along like, I'm a token refugee. That's the one who's from Bespin, by the way. But that the idea of tokenism, as I'm calling it. You're seeing that a lot in today's world, the idea of a token something. Or more specifically, a token African American, a token LGBTQ person. The idea of a token minority is very common in today's world. Even if it's not necessarily even if it's not a token, like literally they didn't want to put in the minority just so they have the representation, but because they thought it was maybe not just the right thing to do for representation, but also the right thing for the story. If you look back at some of the older sitcoms and movies, you'll see, I think, a lot more of the idea of a token African American, especially, where there's one African American in a cast of all white actors. You tend to get that, not as much now, but you tend to get that. Now I think you're getting a lot more of the ideas of a token LGBTQ character than a token African American. But the idea of a token of any minority or group is, I think, still prevalent in our society, and something many people don't like. And the reasons why some don't like it because they don't like the idea of being a token, like they feel like it needs to be organic and authentic, but some don't like it because they feel like they don't want that thing. No, not thing. Why did I use that word? They don't want basically the minorities to appear in. In that case, come on, grow up. People are people regardless of anything. Really anything. Skin color, doesn't matter. There are people. No, whatever minority you're a part of, you're still a person. Which is, I think, very important to understand. But the idea of tokenisms is still common. The idea that minorities in a production have a token to represent them. I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but I'm just trying to go. It's kind of alluding to the idea of you have a token representative of some group because you want them to feel included in. That's what I'm trying to say. There is that parallel. Now, how can we make it so it's the inclusion of minorities is not because you want them to feel included, but because you're treating them like people, and as such, you're just being reflective of them being people. So you're not necessarily colorblind. You're saying you don't see color, but rather the reason why you cast an African American in a role is not because you want a token African American, but is because they are truly the best person for that role. And when it comes to like the LGBTQ characters, that's a bit more hard, I think, to write in a token, because you can't just throw an actor in there and claim that the character is then part of that community. That, I think, has to be more story-based for it to work successfully. You can't just claim a character is gay because you want that token character. I think there really needs to be story reasons behind it. And it's not necessary because, you know, because it makes more compelling storytelling or anything, but because it makes it feel organic in the world. And the way we approach those topics in our society is different than how we approach. It's not something you can, for lack of a better term, discern by looking at somebody. That's something you have to be told, which means it was a conscious choice to include them. And not so much as that's the best fit for the role, but it's more of, we need to make sure this token representation is in. I hope I'm explaining myself correctly. It's somewhat hard to articulate. But let's just put it this way. A character is introduced in a series. Doesn't matter what series. Let's go with Harry Potter. And one character is introduced. You have no inclination of you know, whether or not they're part of the LGBTQ community or not, whether they're gay or not. You have no idea. And then the author decides to treat that. Yes, that character is gay. Okay, so why are you doing that? Are you just doing it because you want to seem more inclusive than you originally were? I don't know. But that's what I'm getting at. Is that a character can't be part of the community just to be a part of the community. If that makes sense. Then, especially when you're talking about stories. You can't just include a character because you want to be representative. You need to include a character that's part of a minority group because it is the right choice and it's part of the world building. It's not just as a cheap appeal to the minority group. That's what I'm getting at. And here, they don't get that deep into it, and I've actually kind of snowballed from how the idea of, you know, a token refugee, a token Twi'lek, a token lawyer, but more of the idea that in here it's presented more as they all have a reason for being there, and it might be just as a token, but perhaps there might be other reasons which is alluded to earlier. And they all kind of brush it off in here, which I think is kind of interesting. They all brush off the concept of tokenisms, like, they joke about it, but in, I think, our real world, it's more of a serious discussion. So, I don't know what you guys think of that, what you thought of my thoughts of it, but let me know, critique me if you will. But I just kind of wanted to bring that up, that how they treated that in the story, how they treated the idea of being a token something was more as a joke than how we treat it in our real world, which we treat as part of the entire debate regarding representation of minority groups and inclusivity and diversity. It's all part of the debate on how we can improve. Right here, in the book, it's treated humorously. Now, is that a reflection of the times the book was written, or is it just a reflection of the world within? That is what I really want to be asking you. I think it's more of a treating the world within. Like in the Empire, it would have been more along the lines of how we are talking about it currently in the real world. But in the Rebel Alliance, it's more humorously. It's like, yes, of course. But they really don't care, is how things like, I'm gonna talk, it doesn't matter. That's how they're treating it, apparently, in the book. More humorously, more nonchalantly, like, well, who cares? So, let me know what you think. What does that say more about the book, the time the book was written, which I just want to remind you was 96 is when it came out, so to give you an inclination. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that. And that's really all I have for you today, so thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of the book club, please give a like. Also, please ring the bell to stay notified of when the next episode of the book club comes out. And as I said earlier, I will be taking next week off with the book club, but I will be back the week after that. So I believe that's all I have for you today, so please consider subscribing. And as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the force be with you always.